Today's show is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls and load balancers, a new managed Kubernetes service, and much more. From predictable pricing to flexible configurations to world-class customer support, you'll get access to all the infrastructure services you need to grow your business. Plus, DigitalOcean's community provides over 2,000 tutorials to help you stay up to date on the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. So to get started on DigitalOcean for free, with a free $50 credit, go to do.co/cloudcast. That's do.co/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. School is back in the swing for most kids. For anybody who's got kids, school's back in swing. We're kind of getting into fall weather a little bit. College football's in full swing, so things are going well. Let's jump right into Cloud News of the Week. A couple of announcements for our friends over at HashiCorp. They had their annual event. And made a couple of interesting announcements. The first one was the Hashi console service mesh is now being offered as a managed service with Microsoft on the Microsoft Azure cloud. So interesting to see Microsoft continue to do partnerships to deliver managed services with a number of people. They did it with HashiCorp. They've done it with Red Hat with OpenShift. They did it with VMware for a virtualization offering. So good to see that out there. Again, multiple service meshes are still kind of viable in the market. So console being one of them. The other one is they extended some functionality around multi-cloud around Terraform. So for those of you that use Terraform, take a look at that announcement. Is around Terraform being able to do more things, Terraform Cloud as an offering and so forth. So take a look at that. Two other announcements we're going to hit on. One of them was from Microsoft. They acquired a company called Movere, Movere, M-O-V-E-R-E. Movere's focuses around cloud migrations. So, we've seen AWS buy into migration services. We've seen Google buy companies that do migration. We're seeing Microsoft Azure buying migration services. Obviously, while they're still making hybrid cloud offerings out in the marketplace, the end game is ultimately to get customers and companies to move their applications up into the public cloud. There's more revenue there. There's better margins there. So, interesting to see Microsoft continuing to jump on that migration bandwagon as well. So we'll see where that evolves as a service. And the last one that I thought was very, very interesting was from a company called Stripe. We've had Stripe on before. A couple of episodes back, we were talking to some of the engineers at Stripe. Stripe is really all about doing payments. So, they're in the payment business. They're in the online payment business, very, very successful. But they offered, they spun up a new service called Stripe Capital. And I thought this was really interesting because essentially what it does, and I'll link to a very good thread from the folks at Stripe that talk about kind of the purpose behind this. But in essence, it's if you are a SaaS company, you have a pretty good understanding of what your cash flow looks like. But obviously, you're trying to add new features to go attract customers. And if you're using Stripe as your payment service, Stripe also has a really good understanding of what your cash flow looks like. And they are actually now offering a way to do lending, essentially, loans against that capital flow. So it's really interesting because it's not necessarily structured as a typical loan. It's not interest against it. There's sort of a one-time fee. And then what they do is they take the payment back in your ongoing recurring revenues. So it's kind of a very interesting way of looking at, when you're working very closely with one of the cloud providers, they understand your business model. They've got visibility into what's going on with your business, that some new business opportunities can emerge. So for those of you that are in the SaaS space, this very well may be something that you want to take a look at, especially if you're doing online digital payments. I thought it was interesting in that, you have a technology company getting into financing, which lots of hardware companies have done in the past, but this was an interesting way uniquely targeting SaaS companies and those that do online payments and take online payments, and the sharing of knowledge around the business the benefits both Stripe as well as their customers. So something to take a look at. It's called Stripe Capital, and we'll put some links to it in the show notes. So with that, we're going to jump right into our show today. We're going to talk a little bit about something that some of you are very interested in if you're following the serverless space. We're going to talk about Knative. So I hope you enjoy that. Let's get to our interview. Today's show is sponsored by PricingWire. Think about all the time, effort, uncertainty, and everything else you are investing into the software solution you're building. Pricing Wire has helped more than 1,000 software and technology innovators like you take a proactive approach to both discover and get paid what you're truly worth. From early startups to Fortune 500 enterprises, across verticals and around the globe, Pricing Wire delivers easy to understand and actionable recommendations to guide your monetization and pricing strategy. If you want to avoid unnecessary challenges or costly regrets and prevent missing time-sensitive revenue opportunities, Pricing Wire can help. Just go to pricingwire.com and book a strategy session today. Pricing Wire helps technology innovators like you design the right offerings, better quantify and message value, set and change prices, select the right pricing metrics, or even decide if usage-based pricing is best for you. Why wouldn't you want to achieve your revenue goals faster and with more confidence? Learn more at pricingwire.com and start making meaningful progress today. We're back, and as we talked about in the intro, many of you have told us over time that you're very interested in serverless as we cover serverless and functions as a service on this space. Usually, I do a pretty good job of getting the technical glitches worked out of the show. This time, I screwed up the beginning of this show. And so I'm going to kind of do an extended introduction to our guests because I screwed up the introduction part that we always do at the beginning of interview. So today's guest is Sebastien Goasguen, who is the CTO and co-founder of TriggerMesh. For those of you that have listened to the show for a while, Sebastien has been on a number of times. He was part of the team that was doing CloudStack way back in the day with cloud.com, was involved with that for quite a while, was over at Citrix, was doing some independent work and created something called Kubeless, which was a very early serverless framework on top of Kubernetes. That company that he had built, again, we highlighted him on the show, was sold to Bitnami. Bitnami has since been sold to VMware. He is now, like I said, started a company along with Mark Hinkle, another friend of the show, called TriggerMesh. And we're going to talk about not so much what's going on with TriggerMesh. We've covered TriggerMesh on the show. We'll put some things in the show notes, but really kind of what's the state of Knative? How's it evolved? How is it expanding and so forth? So just kind of wanted to give that introduction. Sebastian's a great guest. I apologize to him for sort of screwing up the beginning of the recording of this, but where it picks up is right at the meat of the interview. So let's look forward to talking to Sebastien. For those folks who may kind of follow the serverless space, so let's say they follow Lambda, for example, and maybe don't necessarily follow kind of a multi-cloud or Kubernetes as much. Give them a little bit of background, maybe sort of the TLDR on how we went from some of the individual kind of serverless on Kubernetes projects like you had created Kubeless to kind of how we got to this thing called Knative, which has kind of become more of a standard way of doing the different types of things you need for serverless on Kubernetes. Kind of how has the history evolved over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so very interesting question. We could talk an hour about this, several hours even, have beers and everything. But bottom line, at the same time that Kubernetes was, becoming de facto for container orchestration, AWS was pushing extremely hard and gaining a lot of momentum with their AWS Lambda service, right? And you definitely see a lot of people that go straight to AWS Lambda. And you could even say that this is the true cloud native way, right? The people who develop straight into a cloud provider infrastructure using the cloud provider services. And some of us in the community call it service full. So you develop within a cloud provider and your app is making use of a lot of cloud provider services. So that makes a total sense. But at the same time, I was working on Kubernetes and I didn't see a war between the two, right? Some people wanted to, put Kubernetes and containers against functions and serverless. I really didn't see this. I thought that they were very much complementary. And my angle very early was to say, hey, if you had to build a system like AWS Lambda, how would you do it? And the answer became rather clear. I said, well, you build it on top of Kubernetes. You use Kubernetes as your platform because Kubernetes is a system to build systems. And to do this, to extend the Kubernetes API, you use this amazing capability, which is called custom resource definition. and you start writing those famous controllers or operators, like Red Hat likes to call them. So Kubeless was very much a Kubernetes extension with a controller to be able to deploy function. And that was really a POC that was really to prove that you could write something like Lambda on top of Kubernetes. Other solutions, also were created, like Nucleo, like OpenFaaS, a little bit different, but very similar. Fission. So there were lots of other systems. But then Google open source Knative with Red Hat, support from Pivotal, support from SAP. And now, as you know, in open source and in our new business world, it's very very open. Which technology is going to be durable in the long term, right? And definitely, the tech that's going to be able to rally a lot of vendors around it is going to have way more chances to become pervasive, to get lots of users, right? So when you see something like Knative start, you're like, well, that's most likely is going to be the tech that's going to be the core to start developing serverless offerings on top of Kubernetes.
No, it makes sense, and at some point, there is always space in the open source community where there is a lot of innovation, a lot of different ideas, the sort of let a thousand flowers bloom. And then at some point, the market, typically a customer or set of customers will come back and say, which one do I pick? It's not clear to me which one I pick. They're looking for some stability or some way for them to feel like, hey, if they're going to make an investment in anything, whether it's, through some commercial means or even just open source, that, they're going to be protected, like it's going to be around for a while. So it makes sense that, kind of a standard has emerged here. Let's talk a little bit about the different elements of Knative, because it's, I think if people, know, say Lambda, for example, they go, oh, well, Lambda is, the serverless thing or whatever. And then you realize, oh, wait, Lambda doesn't necessarily do anything without, event sources or, things that can happen after the function triggers. Let's talk about the pieces of Knative so people have some sense of what's part of it. It's got three pieces. It's got a build function, it's got a serving function, and it's got an eventing function. Can you kind of walk us through what do those three things do, and kind of what's the engagement that like a developer or some application deals with those?
Yeah, sure. So that's again very interesting. Because serverless, as I alluded to, it's really service full. So you're going to end up using a lot of different services, and to do this, basically you have to develop a system that's going to be event driven. You're going to receive event from lots of different sources, and you're going to deploy functions as really small, almost microservices. So you see that you need several functionalities in your system. You need a way to package a function into some type of artifact that you can deploy. And for us, with Knative and even before that Kubeless, the artifact was the container. So you needed some type of a build system to be able to take the function and stick it into a container, right? So that's what the build does, and I'll come back to the build story a little bit. Once you've built a container with your function, and hopefully you've done that extremely fast, you're going to start running a basic Kubernetes deployment, right? But on top of that, to make this really nice and to have a nice serverless quote abstraction, you need an autoscaler, you need an ingress, things like this. So that's when the Knative serving component arrives in the picture. And with serving, what you get is you get scale to 0. So if your function is not being used, it goes down to 0 replicas. And if the function gets hit, suddenly it gets awakened and scales up, right? So you automatically get this autoscaler with scale to zero property, which is the main feature of serving. And then you have those events, right? You need to be able to get those events wherever they're from. So and you need a way to flow them through some type of messaging system. So that's what Knative eventing does. And again, it gives you a few APIs so that you can define, this event should go from this place to that place, should trigger this function, and then you have a way to filter events and so on. So you have those three components: build, serving, eventing. And before you ask another question, the build story changed quite a bit.
Right. Yep.
And that's what can confuse a lot of people, because those projects are extremely high velocity. Knative has a release every 6 weeks, right? And it's been a year, so we are now on 0.8. Plus a few patch releases. So things change extremely quickly. There is quick feedback with everybody in the community. So what happened is that build evolved and became much more of a generic pipeline solution. And that gave rise ultimately to what is now known as Tekton, the Tekton project. And Tekton has been moved out of the Knative organization, if you wish, in GitHub. And that led to the creation of the Continuous Delivery Foundation, CDF, right? So that's a little bit of the confusing part in the project organization. The original Knative build is now deprecated. And if you want to do this build functionality, we tell you to go use the Tekton project.
Right. Right. And it's you're right. It does sort of lay out a little bit of so it was a very good kind of layout of the history how we got here. It also does sort of highlight that the benefit of working in open source communities is you get access to a lot of innovation. The potential downside of it is you don't just get to sort of ignore it and assume that nothing will change. You have times when things get put out there and then they evolve and they change and people, more people start getting involved with the community and they go, oh, was this, the best idea when you got started? And so, so we'll put links in the show notes for all those things for those of you that are listening and you go, what was that thing that he talked about at the end? And what was this and that? And so we'll get details.
And Tekton, Tekton is actually a really cool system. So I think a lot of people are going to find Tekton very, very interesting because it's a very generic application pipelining / workflow system, if you want to call it like that.
Right. Yeah, I know some of the guys working on the OpenShift stuff that I do have been very, very intrigued with it and sort of been working with it for a while now. So one of the questions that comes up a lot is sort of a confusion is, and I don't know if these words should be used interchangeably or if we've kind of gotten to a point where we understand them well enough. Sometimes you'll hear serverless and sometimes you'll hear functions as a service. Do they mean the same thing? Should they mean the same thing? Or is there kind of a good way of differentiating when, serverless makes sense to be talking about versus, say, functions as a service?
Yeah. So, names, we all say naming is hard and, yes, that's true. So is serverless a good name? I don't know. It is what it is. The other day, I found in my Google Doc a presentation from 2008 about what is cloud computing, right? And now I have a presentation which is what is serverless,
right?
But FaaS I think is pretty clear: function as a service. So you take a small bit of code and you try to make that runnable or executable. And the way I like to call it is that this is CGI bin on steroid, right? FaaS. So it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's what FaaS is. When we look at serverless, serverless is much more than FaaS because you need to deploy those functions, But then you have the event triggers, you have listening for events, you have linking functions together, and so on, right? So FaaS is one component of serverless, but then the event and the event management makes the crucial bit in serverless. Of course, the last thing I would say is that the cloud providers, the public cloud providers, of course they say, well, if you're on-prem, you're not serverless because you still have to worry about the infrastructure, right? And there what I say is that, it depends on your persona, right? If you are the Kubernetes operator, the Kubernetes administrator, of course you have servers, you're managing them, you're deploying the cluster. So this is not serverless. But if you're a developer on-prem using something like Knative, you're going to have a serverless experience because you're just deploying functions, so FaaS capability, and then you have to declare how your events are going to be consumed and link all your functions. So this is definitely serverless, even though you're on-prem.
Yeah, no, and I think it makes sense. And I think, in general, while we still have, Twitter fights over, naming and words and all that stuff, I think the idea that we see more and more, and this kind of gets validated by, an Amazon building Outposts or Google doing Anthos or, Azure Stack or, IBM buying Red Hat, all these, it's kind of a reality of like, you could talk about there's only one cloud or there's only one approach to things. And I think the market has sort of said, yeah, we may end up picking one approach to something, but we like having some flexibility of saying if it's on premises or if it's in a cloud or, potentially in a second cloud. So yeah, I think that I appreciate kind of you getting at, don't worry about the less part of the naming, the serverless part of it. It's, there is eventing, there is, the framework of how you build a function. Maybe it's a language or something. And I think that's a good explanation. I want to come back to TriggerMesh a little bit. You guys have obviously been, engaging with, with users, as you mentioned. You've built a number of projects that, whether they're, with a partner like GitLab, or you're building them kind of based on feedback you see in the market. What are some of the things that you guys have learned, Kay, over the last year, just in terms of, some of the use cases that people are throwing at you, or maybe something that you didn't necessarily expect, as you really are kind of immersed in this world? Obviously, you've been immersed in it for more than a year, but just kind of what's been going on in the last year or so?
Yeah, so it's been it's been a very good year. We've learned a ton and kept developing the product. One thing that struck us is that we thought that people would adopt serverless much faster, and in fact we're still very, very early in the adoption. So everybody talks about serverless, but aside of AWS Lambda, I would say that there are few people that are going full serverless, right? So people are extremely curious. They wanna start experimenting with Knative. They wanna start doing something, but we're very much at the POC stage, and definitely not in production.
Gotcha.
So very very early. The second thing that I would say is that, again, if you're on Twitter, people make fun of hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and they say, well, this does not exist and so on. And maybe we're not phrasing it properly, but what we're seeing is that people have many different types of workloads, right? They don't just have one workload. So typically yesterday I was on the phone with an OpenShift customer, and then they wanted to know about TriggerMesh, so we gave them a briefing, and these people, they are using AWS. Some part of their business unit is using Lambda, but they're also using Kubernetes, right? And another business unit is using basic VMs. So they have this very hybrid, heterogeneous environment. And what they're looking for is a way to bring everything under the same type of developer experience, to bring some cohesion to this IT environment. So very much, it's hybrid cloud. Maybe we should call it more hybrid workload. And they're looking for a way to, yes, I want to do some Kubernetes and maybe it could be on GKE, but I also want to do some Lambdas and it could be on AWS. But maybe, some users, they're going to want to deploy those functions on Kubernetes using Knative. So and I think I've said this, before on the show, the world is way less black and white that, what we pretend on social media. There's much more gray out there. And definitely that's transpiring into everything we've seen.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think if you get away from the buzz of it, you get a little more pragmatic, and you start actually talking to people about what problems they're trying to solve. I think you're right. It's there is some sort of multi or hybrid use case that people are trying to plan for, and whatever they call it becomes a little bit irrelevant. What they want is, is it possible to make things consistent? Do I have to pay for that? Does that just come naturally? And I think, the things that you guys are working on, whether it's, just Knative or whether it's, building Lambda emulation or other things, I think those give people real answers to the things they're trying to solve.
And the last, sorry to cut you off, Brian.
Go ahead.
The last bit I'll say is that, in terms of events, at the beginning, we were very focused on Google events, Azure events, AWS events. So we have a large set of event sources. But then what we realized that people are, much more interested in legacy type of events. Right, so they want events from their VMware infrastructure. Right. They have events from their IBM MQ messaging system or their Solace messaging system, right? So very much I'm probably oversharing here, but what we're seeing is a will to actually bring events from legacy systems onto the world of cloud native. And call this serverless or something else, but instead of focusing on FaaS or public cloud events entirely, we're seeing we're seeing that things resonate. TriggerMesh resonates when we talk about bringing those legacy events into the cloud native world.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap it up with kind of one last question, and I don't expect you to have a crystal ball by any means, but any area, especially as you're following it, whether it's any of the three areas of Knative, build, serving, or eventing, that you're kind of most excited about, maybe some new things coming, or some things that are kind of coming down the pipeline, just in this space, maybe not necessarily exactly in Knative, but kind of around the serverless space that you think are going to make things better for users?
Yep. So first, Brian, build is deprecated.
Right. No, I know. TechCon.
There you go.
Sure I was paying attention earlier.
There you go. Perfect. So build is deprecating. No, the one thing really to look out for is that Knative, at least the serving component, is going to be GA. Hopefully sometime in September, maybe, at the latest early October. So, look out for this Knative going GA. I think that's going to be a strong signal to the community that, this is going to be, this is available. The API is stable, and you should definitely start looking at it, carefully. If I have a wish, it's not Christmas, but if I have a wish, I really would like Knative to be donated to CNCF. I think that would also, help tremendously the adoption and build a cohesive story with Kubernetes and the larger container ecosystem. So that's it.
Yeah.
Watch out for QA and hopefully it will get to CNCF one day.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people have different opinions on the CNCF, but I think they've in general proven to be a very good, very good governance body. And when the projects are in CNCF, they tend to do very well. They get good visibility, and they allow a lot of contribution from different groups. So, well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up with that. Folks, we will have in the show notes all the ways to go track down Sebastien. The links to his projects on GitHub, the TriggerMesh projects, some of the work that he's doing. He's presenting at Velocity here pretty soon in Berlin, and obviously speaks quite a bit out into the community. So Sebastien, as always, it's good to catch up to you. Thank you so much for the time today. And
thanks, Brian, and say hi to Aaron.
I will. Folks, as we wrap it up today, I want to thank both DigitalOcean and PricingWire for sponsoring today's show. It's easy to learn more about PricingWire and book a strategy session at pricingwire.com. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. We want to thank everybody for listening every week. We want to thank everybody for telling a friend, for rating the show, and sharing it on iTunes and all the other places. And with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.